Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion never dies. This episode is a slice of China life from Chengdu with love. Just over a year ago, I did a special April the 1st episode called Zhongguo Never Dies, the Chinese Culture Podcast. It's an hour-long special. In the first half hour, I drew upon my writings from my first ever arrival in China back in 2015. And then in the second half, I covered topics that my Chinese friends asked me to explain to those who want to learn a little bit more about China. So half was my own observations on China as a foreigner, and half topics from Chinese people wanting their culture to be explained. And I also gave some reflections on my first experiences almost a decade on. I'm very glad I had those writings. Now, it's more than a decade on. I've come for a short stay to China. I shared some of my earlier bits in my monthly newsletter, which you can subscribe to over at albionneverdies.com. But here I have a little more detail and much more about my last couple of weeks. Obviously, there are no pictures in the podcast. The newsletter is always photo illustrated. I also enjoy taking videos for the YouTube. There's a few more sounds here, obviously. And I do find these various ways of sharing actually help me observe the world around me, and the different mediums help me focus on different aspects of my travelling experiences. Of course, I'm also very, very fortunate that I have friends here in the city, both Chinese and expatriate, aside from my current colleagues, again, both Chinese and expatriate. So, for those who don't know, why am I here? Well, I'm here as part of a university partnership. I'm teaching English, academic English, for the University of Leeds, which has partnerships with Southwest Jiaotong University here in Chengdu City. It's one of a number of partnerships between British universities and leading Chinese universities. I'm here for an 11-week course that I'll teach, plus assessments, and it very much ties into my work at the University of Leeds. So, first of all, I'll go through a few things that I put in my newsletter before getting into some deep dives into how we perceive culture, and a few recommendations for Chengdu and what it's like to potter about right at the end. So if you are listening to this wondering, what can I see in Chengdu if I go there, that's right at the end, so feel free to skip over there. My arrival to Chengdu was about a month ago. My journey to Chengdu was smooth but long. My 10-plus hour flight was intermittently affected by turbulence, so whilst I'd normally simply sleep on a long-haul flight and normally arrive feeling fine, I kept waiting on this one and arrived somewhat worse for the journey. Unfortunately, I had a few days to recover before teaching, to get over jet lag, some kind of plane lurgy, some kind of cold, flu, whatever, which also meant I wasn't feeling great, and general sleeplessness, and the various local pollens and pollutions of any new city. In fact, as the plane came down, I was fascinated to see field after field of oilseed rape flowers, those tiny little yellow flowers just blooming all over the city. I'd arrived in their blooming season. I've only spent one day complaining about their blooming season when the wind blew contrary to the usual direction. I was left with streaming eyes and nose to match, thanks to hay fever. I'm not actually that susceptible to hay fever, but it seems at long last I've found what I'm sensitive to if it's in sufficiently large quantities. Those little yellow flowers seem to surround the city. Anyway, it was only morning, and the time spent in discomfort has been outmatched by the time spent in the pool and gym. So far, I am housed in a very decent hotel. It did put me in mind of Harrison Ford, who was asked, as Indiana Jones, he got to travel to some of the most beautiful exotic places in the world, and he was asked what was that like, and he responded that the view from the toilet is pretty much the same everywhere. So on Instagram and YouTube, I'm sure it will look great, but there is the reality to deal with. But that's normally the first few days' arrival. Now I'm here, I'm in a bit of a routine, which is very simply hotel, work, hotel, work, hotel, work, and occasionally the weekend. My students are Year 1 undergraduates on 4-year engineering programs, so I teach them academic English with a slant towards their kind of STEM studies. All the materials, all the assessments are agreed upon by both the University of Leeds and Southwest Jiaotong University, and they'll graduate with a full degree from both. So great materials, and the students are naturally brighter than average, otherwise they would not have been accepted for either university, but they are of course young. These are the youngest students I ever teach. So often I'm teaching students before they go on to their masters, but it's great to work with them and build an academic foundation. That is very, very satisfying. I've got around 80 students who I teach in 4 blocks, so rarely more than 20 at a time. It's the wonderful thing about being a language teacher. You tend to have those classes of 15 to 20 classes, maybe a little bit more, as opposed to when they're on the main engineering program. Then, of course, they're in groups of, much larger groups, because they're just receiving lectures, seminars, workshops, and so on, which can be much larger. So it's a fun bit. It's a good bit of the course. I enjoy it very, very, very much. Now, I've doubtless been helped in my settling in to Chengdu by the fact that I lived in China for 6 years. On the other hand, I left China in 2021, not expecting to come back, and I'm very, very wary at false confidence on my part. So a single year can see considerable change in the Middle Kingdom, let alone to close to 5. For example, on one occasion, I was living in China, I came home late from work, so maybe 10, 11 o'clock, close to 11 I think, set out early the next day, and in that short time, there was not only a new bus stop outside my flat, there was a new bus shelter and a new bus route going past already in operation. Things change quickly, and whole new metro lines can be created in a single year. But fortunately, in terms of day-to-day getting about, WeChat or Weixin is still the main app of choice here for everything from messages, sharing on social media, payments for everything from a can of Coke to a house or even a flight. Alipay has become more and more widespread. A local friend told me that WeChat had a bit of a disagreement with the main food ordering app, Meituan, and they had stopped WeChat payments for maybe a week, maybe a few weeks, and that kind of broke the permanent habit, so people started using Alipay instead. So now it's a bit more balanced between WeChat and Alipay. That's an interesting change, but not a total change. Both existed when I was here. It's more about frequency of use than any absolutes. The metro here in China is largely built to the same template for all cities, which is great for me. I'd never been to this city before, by the way. I should say that. This is my very first time in Chengdu. However, the metro is the same as all the others, pretty much, so I found it very, very easy to get about. Easy with phone apps, easy with the metro. Language, by the way, has not proven too much of an issue. I'd anticipated a much greater local variance from Mandarin, but it seems more standard than actually many Cantonese-influenced Mandarin speakers I used to hear in the south. Now, I should say, I did study Mandarin Chinese as part of my undergraduate studies. It was a minor few courses that I did, and of course I did live out here, and languages tends to be my speciality, but I know many, 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 many people who are so much better than myself. I feel that I really don't speak Chinese. Maybe 5 years ago I could join in a conversation. Now, as I say, I wasn't expecting to use it, so I largely left it. But I found it quite standard here to my non-expert ears, and I found it pretty easy to communicate. The Chinese version of Uber, Didi, works pretty much same but different. It's had loads of different updates, so I've been having loads and loads of minor adjustments. So a new Chinese city to me, but very, very easy to settle into. One of the first things I went to with a friend who lives here was, to our amusement, the main People's Park. People's Park is a fairly common name for a park here in China, so we went to People's Park and we saw the local marriage market. So you have loads and loads of fences. On each of the fences you'll have either sheets of A4 blue paper or pink paper, blue for boys, pink for girls, and it's all the singletons, the women listing their height, weight, various other attributes, the men listing their salary, MBAs, that kind of thing, and all kind of interesting details like, no debt, parents and grandparents of social security, just that people know they're not trying to find a partner who will then pay for their parents or grandparents. And these adverts are put up often by the people's parents, with or without their consent, and the parents are the contact. So you walk along this path, you see all these adverts for singletons, you can take a photo, get their phone number, WeChat details, whatever, get in contact with, say, the parents, who then might try to arrange something, and it's all registered. So there's an official stamp on all these bits of paper to say that all these bits of information are true, stamped by the authorities under pain of prosecution by the authorities for the original poster. So it is said that often the person in the advert does not know that this advert has gone up. Their parents are worried about them, they've been single too long, so they put this up. I guess it's similar to a dating website, except that it has that official stamp to make sure all the information is true. A low-trust society, you might say. It's an example of it. Now, where do I get my perspectives on Chinese society? Obviously, I lived here, but my language isn't that great, and so I listen to a wide range of people, but I am quite selective. Often, expats in China will say China is safe. Chinese people will often say it's safe. In my experience, expats will often double down on this, at times far more than my local friends. Sometimes I wonder where this comes from. Expats read of terrible things in their home newspapers. If it bleeds, it leads in the West. And many will admit to me they never read the local newspapers. Those who do read those local newspapers will note the absence of any serious crimes, robberies, break-ins, murders. I used to read the Shenzhen Daily. Shenzhen is where I lived. I used to read it fairly regularly and can confirm serious crimes were very, very rarely publicised, except when a non-Chinese person committed it. So we might not go off the media. If you never read the British papers or the American papers, you might think Britain and America are absolutely safe as well. So what would you go off? We go off what we see with our own eyes, which often, especially for English teachers out here, looks fantastic. An English teacher in China is paid a premium. They're not just paid as a teacher, they're paid a premium because they're out here. And it's a large enough premium to move many into a very, very different socio-economic bracket from what they're previously used to. So, for example, one of the adult education centres I managed was opposite a multi-storey Gucci shop. An expat commented on how safe he felt just wandering about the local area compared to wandering about the area around the school in the USA where he used to teach. But he taught in the USA in an area that was not opposite a Gucci shop, not even a single-storey Gucci shop. They do exist in the USA. You can find Gucci shops, very, very definitely. People in those areas probably feel pretty safe wandering around. So what you're feeling isn't so much a cultural difference, at least not between countries. You're feeling that difference between, well, socio-economic situations. China is a nation of over 1 billion people. This is not a nation where no serious crime is ever committed, not even according to Chinese official statistics. But they're not widespreadly reported in the same way that they are in the Western papers. It doesn't seem that if it bleeds, it leads. Not that I've ever read a Chinese newspaper, just translations of them. What are we safe from in China? We're pretty safe from direct, violent city crime, according to what's reported and whatever we can infer. I met a man who met much of his life in downtown LA. Fair to say that as he wandered around a major Chinese city, he felt a lot safer than he did wandering around downtown LA. What about those from small towns in the UK? I mean, there are tweeny scoundrels, teenagers who are the scourge of Facebook community groups. Either they're the scourge because they're riding their bikes around somewhere they shouldn't be riding their bikes, or they're hanging around on a street corner, or alternatively they're staying at home and people are saying the kids should get out more. Where we can complain about them. There are more general dangers in China. Traffic, accidents, again, even going off official statistics, traffic accidents are more significant here. Various goods standards, building standards, baby milk standards. There was the baby milk scandal some time ago now, but I have done the milk run, getting baby milk in Hong Kong and bringing it to the mainland for a friend, because in the mainland they absolutely did not trust the baby milk that was on sale. Now, the reason I did the milk run is because the amount per person is limited, with astonishing fines for exceeding, and all her family members who could do it that week had done it that week, and they just needed a bit more. So I've done the baby milk run. That's not something you have to do in the UK. You're not in the UK going to France to buy baby milk because it's safer over there. What do the Chinese say about safety? Well, obviously, with over 1 billion of them, quite a wide variety of things, and those I know are those who've chosen to learn English, a small minority, often studied abroad, a tiny minority. Again, I've never read a Chinese newspaper, I don't expect to. The English language press is very limited here, and I'm very critical of it. Again, it's to a very limited audience. Even putting aside any question of official scrutiny and control I have a lifetime ban on streaming on WeChat, for example, possibly because it was in English a few years ago, and back then there was limited language support on the app, so what I was saying couldn't be monitored. So I have a lifetime ban from streaming on that app in China. So where am I getting my sources? My immediate comparison is to my life as a teenager in Turkish Cyprus. Many expatriates formed fascinating views of the locals and their perspectives. I have to add in here the ancient Brits, as they were generally known, ex-colonial officers, often in their 90s back in the early 2000s, were often really switched on. I mean, these ancient Brits, the colonial people, they devoted their lives to learning other languages, had put in serious time overseas at a time when communications to back home were scant indeed. I mean, I'm in China now, doing a podcast that will be released in the West. They couldn't do that back then. This experience had a profound effect on all of them, and they're often really engaged with the culture in quite interesting ways. I thought very highly of them, and much more highly of the colonial people than those who'd later kind of studied colonialism, been incredibly critical of it and their legacy and so on. Anyway, younger expats lacked that life experience, and it often showed. My perspective speaking Turkish was very different. I knew what the papers said compared to the English language press. I knew what was being said on the radio, and I knew what people said in Turkish in coffee shops. I knew what they said to me. I could overhear what they're saying to each other. I often felt it was a difference between watching fish from a ship or a boat on the waterfront versus swimming with them when you're snorkeling or freediving. So that's what makes me so aware of my own limitations. In China, I see the surface, I hear reports from those who swim deeper than I, and let me give you an example. Do Turkish Cypriots eat pigeons? No. Turkish Cypriots don't eat pigeons. It's not on the menus at restaurants, but there was a Brit who for some reason understood or misunderstood something on the menu and thought they were serving pigeons. Now, I've come across this error before, like there was a sign outside a school and a Brit said, no, that's the word for pigeons, it's something like the pigeon school. In that case, it was because the Turkish word for trust, güven, or as a verb, güvenmek, is quite similar to the word for pigeon, güvercin. It's spelt in a similar way, and I guess sounds similar enough. So maybe there's something on the menu about a menu you can trust. Who knows? But this Brit was a birder, and he got really keen on campaigning against this restaurant serving pigeons, to the bafflement and absolute outrage of the restaurant owner, and it ended up getting into an English language newspaper. It's a misunderstanding that just went rarely out of proportion to the issue at hand. And years later, Brit told me with full confidence that the locals used to eat pigeons until the British campaigned against it. This is absolutely not true, but it became embedded in that expat community. It does make me think of Ian Fleming's novel Dr. No, where James Bond is put into action because of a bird society, a bird appreciation society. Anyway, I've had a healthy scepticism of expat rumours ever since, which was not dampened by doing peace studies as my first degree, my BA, and being lectured on the Middle East by professors who could not order a coffee in Arabic or Turkish or Farsi. Having my father for a father, he trained the Kuwait Army on loan from the British Army in the late 70s and 80s. I was incredibly sceptical about their claims that nobody in, quote, the administration understood, again in quotes, the Arab mindset. There's no shortage of Arabists in the civil service. The army has a whole school of languages about this, which may have, diminished by the early 2000s or the 2010s, but there are definitely people in the administration who understand it, and whether politicians listen to them is of course another matter. Humphrey Appleby, and Yes Minister, might say, we have dreadful policy, but it's terribly well enacted by the civil service. Anyway, if I doubted something in a lecture, I might ring home and ask, and then later on have my own experience in Saudi and Oman, and then I could see who was closer to what I felt was the truth. And funnily enough, it wasn't the professors who didn't even speak those languages. That's not to dismiss all of them, of course, but there were a couple. I'll also note, perhaps dangerously, take this out of context, please don't, I'm married to one. That for me is not a get out of jail free card. When people say, oh, I know the culture, I'm married to one. I've met many curious and interesting individuals from various cultures, often married to someone equally curious from another culture who claims this as their absolute authority on their insights. Sometimes these insights are as curious as the person. Again, I'm not saying that I never listen to somebody married to a Chinese person or Turkish person, nor that I never listen to a professor. There are those who I actively seek out in all those categories for their opinions and insights. Just to say, I'm very, very selective. And by the way, please feel free to be selective about which of my views you take to heart. I don't agree with anyone else in the world on absolutely everything, and I don't expect anyone in the world to absolutely agree with me on everything. So, be selective. I'm going to carry on that theme for just a little bit more. Exoticization, othering, Orientalism. There are some people who go on business trips and holidays and say, oh, lovely place, lovely people. I don't take that too much. I think it's good. Great to get out there. Great to see something you've read about for yourself. But often you're giving the locals money. Therefore they love you. Try getting money out of them. Suddenly there'll be people just like people back home. I'm also a bit wary of people in love with a culture. A bit like if a man's in love with a girl and he says, oh, but she's the most beautiful girl ever. Well, I'm not going to argue with him. But I don't have to take it to heart either. So I was walking through a Chinese park with a friend, and he was pointing out the music in the park, which it was absolutely lovely. And he was saying, you never see anything like this back home. You never see anything like this back home. Which might be true to his experience, but where I live in West Yorkshire, I live in a small town, and every summer, there's music in the park. Not just once, not just twice, but all throughout the summer. And it's not just, amateurs or minor bands, not to put them down, but including brass bands that you pay a lot of money to go and see if they're in a concert hall, but they're just in the park. So you do have it. Obviously, it's a different flavour. It's a different thing, and if this is your flavour, all power to you. I'm glad you have it. But just like, this culture is important because we value family and we value food, well, Arabs have often said that they value their culture because they value family and food. Chinese people value their family and value food. In fact, most cultures have come across at some level value their family or value their food, but in a slightly different way. One of the most common ones about the Chinese is the idea that they're amazingly studious. Again, largely true to my experience, but the ones I experience are the ones who are fluent in English, or are learning English, or want to be fluent in English. And of course at universities, I'm at a tier 1 university teaching at the moment, so obviously they've been selected, they are phenomenally bright. So I don't want to take that and immediately say, well, the whole society is organised along the lines of Confucius. Imagine if you were Chinese coming to the UK, if you were at Eton, Oxford, Cambridge, or one of the Russell Group universities, you'd say that British culture is amazingly studious. Not all Brits are fantastic. That's not necessarily the entirety of my experience of the UK. One point I'd make about people who are in love with a culture, especially coming from UK and US to China, is that sometimes they just find themselves in a different socio-economic bracket. And that makes such a considerable difference. Food is cheap here, unless you're trying to replicate food from back home, but being on a UK salary or an expat salary whilst trying to get out and about, well, you're enjoying, for a little bit, the good life. I mentioned China can be a low-trust society, so I thought I'd talk about scams I have known. Not that I've heard about, but ones that I have experienced. Actually, first of all, I heard about them, then I experienced them. So, Shenzhen is the tech city. It's where you get your mobile phones, your computer programs, your electric cars. That's the city you go to. And so there was a well-known scam where if you walked past someone, they might drop a cheap phone on the sidewalk. You don't know the difference between the expensive one and the cheap one, so they'll start screaming and shouting. They'll demand money from you there in the street, otherwise they'll call the police, and you'll have to deal with that. So you're just paying money to get them to go away. And now, I've been told about this loads of times, I've been shown videos of it, and there's a bit of a public information campaign to try and stop this. I was walking home from work, and somebody, I think, got their timing slightly wrong, because I walked past him, and then he dropped his phone. There's a little bit too much of a pause, so I looked, he started to shout, and I just looked at him with such disbelief, and somebody who knew me was walking the other way and saw what happened, and we both just kind of laughed, and that was it. He just kind of moved on to his next intended victim. So I got away with that one absolutely fine. I was not scammed, but he tried. I visited Shanghai for work, And I've been told, I got to watch out. These girls will, they'll come up to you in the street and they'll say, oh, let's go have a drink. And then you'll go out with them, and then they'll charge you like thousands of RMB, so hundreds of pounds for a drink. Blah 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 blah. So I went to Shanghai. I was in the Bund, and yeah, a couple of girls came up to me asking me, oh, do you want to go to a bar and all that? To be honest, my alarm bells went off, not because I've been warned, but because generally plastics, as in the mean girls terminology, the plastics don't come up to me in the street and offer me a drink. My initial thought is they probably wanted my kidneys or something, but no, it was part of the Shanghai tea scam. So yeah, that was one that I managed to escape from. In Chengdu, well, I've been taken along to a few beautiful jewellery shops by a friend who was saying, look at this amazing shop. Even here, they could be fake. Buyer beware. And I can understand, actually, why this sometimes generates a certain snobbishness about menswear. So some people, when they find out my suits are by a tailor in China, if they know their stuff, they'll look at it and they'll judge it on its own merits. But sometimes you get people, oh, a Chinese suit. And I'm always intrigued by that reaction. Obviously, if you fly in and out in East Asia and you don't know the place, you become an absolute magnet for scams, weirdos generally. I was walking down the street in China, and somebody's come up, oh, hello. Clearly not quite so well adjusted, friendly enough, but not quite so well adjusted. And a friend said, gosh, I've never ever had that here in Chengdu. But yeah, because I'm obviously foreign, I obviously stand out. I've also had some very, very friendly interactions that seem pretty well adjusted. But you stand out in a place, you become a magnet for certain behaviours. Whereas when you live in a place, you build relationships, you build trust, you know the good people, you know the markets to go to, and they see you as a future customer, not just as a one-time customer. So it can change a great deal. I'm happy with my suits. I've had the same tailor for over 10 years now. But on the subject of fakes, I have to tell a story about my friend Daniel Gaster. Please do check out his YouTube, The Field Office. I'll put something in the show notes so you can find it really easily. You can find him on Instagram at Daniel Gaster. I really like when he's done articles from Tailors with Love, that blog, and especially the ones where he's bought like an item that James Bond wore, like screen accurate, not screen used. He's bought something, worn it for like a year or two, maybe more. Then he's reviewed like, how did it wear? Because there's a lot of unboxing videos which are fun, but I really like his how did it wear. And he did a really, really good blog on the long green jacket James Bond wears in No Time to Die. I was slightly sold on that jacket, by the way, when Matt Spazer said in his bondsuits.com blog that it looked like the Han Solo on Endor jacket. That actually put me more in favour of it. But yeah, I really liked Daniel Gaster's review of it. It was great. And then, idly, in the UK, with no expectation of coming back to China, idly I was browsing Taobao, like the Chinese eBay, and there's a picture, yes, of James Bond wearing the jacket, but if I swiped, then I saw my friend Daniel Gaster wearing the jacket. So I took a screenshot, sent it to him. I was like, do you know there's a shop in China using you as the model? He did not. It was clearly a fake. You could tell from the price. Very, very cheap jacket. I put it in my basket just in case. And sure enough, when I came here, one of the first things I did was I bought the fake jacket. For me, it's not a Daniel Craig jacket. It's a Daniel Gaster fake jacket. And it's arrived. It's actually pretty good quality. I've seen Daniel Gaster's jacket in reality, and it's a much, much finer corduroy. You can tell this is a designer thing, whereas mine is a pretty regular thing. It's a pretty regular corduroy. It's much heavier, but it's still well cut. I actually really, really like it. I bought other tributes. The garage jacket in No Time to Die. It was in the trailer. I loved it. I think everyone loved it. Just a cool dad jacket. I got the fake version of that, and I actually really, really like the fake version. So yeah, you can have pretty good quality fakes, sometimes an improvement on the quality, sometimes below the quality. Sometimes it's factories who make the original and they just churn out an extra few units to sell to their friends. Again, Turkish Cyprus used to do that because they'd make designer jeans there, and sometimes they'd sell off a few to their friends. You know, I live there, so I could pick up some Armani jeans quite cheap. I was actually pretty horrified when I realised that my Armani jeans were my normal price for jeans, and then Marks and Spencer's were phenomenally more expensive, let alone Armani themselves. Anyway, I'm quite used to this idea that the shop can manufacture jeans for the official purpose and then have a few on the side. Sometimes they just lose the license and they carry on. Sometimes it is a fake. Sometimes they'll buy out the machines from a previous like Gucci store or whatever, and then they'll just use the same machines to make fakes, and sometimes it's just a fake. Sometimes it's the same machines, but with different materials, lower grade materials. This isn't just selling to foreigners, and this isn't just selling to Chinese. They can even differentiate. There's been a real trend lately in China of people buying from the same shop, giving an address in a big city, and then to a smaller, potentially their parents in the hometown, and then there'll be from the same shop, from the same link, two different qualities of item, the tier 1 city item and the tier 2 or 3 city item. I've been enjoying those videos lately. But I've done a lot of talking about the concepts of looking at another culture. Let's look at this city that I'm in, Chengdu. First of all, Chengdu is the animal city. Again, talking to a local friend, getting some recommendations on what I should talk about. I should talk about it being the animal city. That's very different from Shenzhen, although I'm told that city is changing, and I did see the beginning of that back in 2021, the emergence of pet cafes, the increase in the number of pets from next to none. I'd been told before I went out to China in 2015 that in the UK the birds from the trees, whilst in Guangdong they're on the barbecue, and in fact I scarcely heard any birds for the first few years of living there. Perhaps it was the mega building works, constantly ongoing, perhaps it was indeed thanks to local food habits. In 2020 Guangdong became the first Chinese province to outlaw the eating of wild animals, and someone from another province told me, well, we didn't need those laws. Prince Philip once got into trouble for saying if it flies in the air and is not a bird, if it swims in the sea, it's not a submarine, it has 4 legs and is not a chair, the Cantonese will eat it. And I once asked my local colleagues what they thought of this, and they replied that it was a common Chinese perspective about the Cantonese, and the Cantonese person in our office said that she was proud of it. And it's a common explanation that the Cantonese have survived, like the French, devastating famine after devastating famine, and so had turned kind of creativity in the kitchen, at first a necessity, into something to be proud of. But Chengdu, this is a city of dogs, large and small, on the lead, roaming about, dogs, cats. It's a city of animals, maybe not so much pet rabbits. They are very, very much on the menu, and yes, I have seen spicy rabbit head for sale here. It's a local kind of popular favourite. I haven't tried any, but mainly because when I saw it wasn't dinner time, and the person I was with was put off by it. But spicy rabbit head is very much a thing. Otherwise, absolutely love animals. I've also been told by local friends that Chengdu is the home of mahjong. Now, gambling is officially illegal in China, hence the massive casinos in Macau. So now Macau is a special autonomous region, an SAR. Previously it was a Portuguese outpost until 1999. Now, if it's not fully legal, street gambling is kind of turned a blind eye to in Chengdu. This is one where I have slight questions, because you can certainly see street gambling in pretty much any residential district anywhere in China. The police do clean up from time to time. I haven't seen it, but somebody I very much trust has seen the police going up to clear out this crime, to this disgruntlement of many, many, many local grandpas, and obviously after a few months it came back. But if this is not a thing in China, why do so many parks have very definite mahjong tables out, if not for gambling? Well, the answer is because you're supposed to play for fun, not for money, or not too much. However, Chengdu is said to be the home of mahjong. So, one thing I can say for absolute certainty is Chengdu is the cosplay city. Now, again, that's not to say this can't be seen anywhere in China. It certainly can, but this is a city where you can more frequently see it. I'm told fashions are more free here, people are more kind of tolerant, so many girls, and I have seen a boy dress in Lolita fashion, not for photographs specifically, and not for an event, just going about their daily business. If you're not aware, Lolita is a fashion style primarily from Japan, influenced by Victorian clothing, styles from like the Rococo period. A very distinctive property of Lolita fashion is the aesthetic of cuteness. There's a whole bunch of subcultures within it. There's Gothic Lolita, Classic Lolita, Sweet Lolita. The main feature is a huge volume of the skirt, created by wearing a petticoat or crinoline. The skirt is often bell-shaped, sometimes A-line, and sometimes there's a big blouse with a skirt or dress, or a one-piece that comes down to the knees. Often there's wigs in combination, which are in all kinds of interesting colours, with hair bows and bonnets and so on. So it's quite a striking style. However, I would say, as much as it draws on history, the rule of cool, or the rule of kind of cuteness, overrules all other style guides. Now, in Shenzhen, I would see people in unusual and interesting outfits, but more often historically inspired. That is because I live near a park that was popular for photography. There had been a special show there, all kinds of different booths, I guess, or different areas to represent different areas of China. So you could go to one little area, take amazing photos, go to another little area, take amazing photos. So often people dress in like historically inspired costumes. Sometimes they claimed it's from one dynasty or another. To my casual eyes, it looked like which dynasty it was supposed to be was basically how flowy it was. I asked a few local friends who are kind of equally casual about their interest in Chinese dynasties, and they said, yeah, it seems to be about how flowy the costume is, but the rule of cool overruled all of that. It was just a photo exhibition, and they'd hire a professional photographer to go along. It's all part of the fun. But Chengdu is more cosplay throughout the city and more for day-to-day life, which I find quite interesting. Chengdu is also the hot pot city, or Sichuan generally, this province is. It's one of the more famous cuisines in China. In many ways, it's the opposite of Cantonese food, which I'm more used to. Cantonese food is quite mild. Sichuanese food is very, very spicy. Now, I have had Sichuan hot pot in Guangdong, and I've had it here, and if I was perhaps a little bit more gourmet, I would be able to tell the difference. But I'm very happy to have Sichuan hot pot in Sichuan, in the same way that I've had Kendal mint cake in Kendal, Pontefract cake in Pontefract. I'm not differentiating on taste. Pontefract cake in Pontefract tastes pretty much the same as anywhere else. It's licorice. But you have to do these things. It's special. Now, I said I'd talk about some of the local sites. So, downtown Chengdu, there's a place called Taikoo Li, which is very much the magnet. All the big brands gather there. There is a temple in the centre of this massive brand shopping centre, Burberry and Barber and all those kind of things. I've been to it a few times, but every time it's because somebody else wanted to go. It used to be a place where people would take loads and loads of photographs because it looks great. Until a local politician was photographed there with his mistress, it went viral, and now photographs are banned there. Yeah, you could probably sneak a few. Of course, I went to People's Park, the one of the marriage market and talent show. I've been to Huanhua Park, which had an absolutely amazing bird reserve. So I mentioned in Shenzhen, I genuinely didn't see birds, I didn't hear birds, but there it's actually a bird reserve. And there's all the Chinese grandpas with their absolutely amazing cameras taking photographs. Even I was able to take a fairly good photograph of some of the birds there. I was really, really impressed. It's a really nice park. Also, this is bamboo China. So where I lived before, bamboo, I mean, it grew there, but it wasn't that common. Whereas here, there's actual good outcrops of bamboo. Because, of course, this is where pandas come from. This is their natural habitat. Before I talk about that, I just have to say I've been to a nearby city, Dujiangyang, which has a very famous bridge. I walked across it at night, along with a few other 100 people in that moment. I've actually walked across a fake one in Shenzhen, a declared fake one, I should say. I've also seen fake Eiffel Towers and fake Venices and all sorts of tourist attractions here. I've been around a fake Europe at least once, I think a couple of times. A couple of fake Europes, actually. So, there's quite a few fake tourist attractions here in China. Shenzhen's got a reputation for having quite a few of them. I've seen quite a few Great Walls. I've seen the real Great Wall, but I've also got photographs of myself with quite a few fake Great Walls. Anyway, Dujiangyang, fantastic to see the real bridge, because the real one is very, very fine, incredibly detailed, worth seeing, but it is much more crowded than the fakes. Anyway, pandas. Pandas. I think it's unusual to listen to anything about Sichuan or Chengdu especially and leave pandas for the last 30 odd minutes, but I currently have not seen them. I've seen gigantic statues of pandas, I've seen soft toys of pandas, I've seen pandas on bags, I've seen pandas on a taxi, graphics of them, I've seen virtually every iteration of panda merchandise that I could possibly imagine, and a few that I probably wouldn't have imagined. This is where pandas come from. So if people fly here, the must-see is pandas. Obviously, I'm working, and then, doing other things. At some point, I'll see the pandas. Perhaps. But I am quite tempted to be the only tourist who ever comes to Chengdu and doesn't see them. Also, I have to relate, what always amuses me, a Chinese friend pointed out, it's a strange national animal for China to have. The Brits have the lion or the bulldog for determination. The Americans have the eagle for freedom. Why do the Chinese have pandas? They sleep all day. They're on the verge of extinction. It's hard to keep them going when the Chinese are so hardworking, certainly not going extinct. Chinese people don't just flourish in one environment. They flourish in San Francisco, Liverpool, UK, and all the various regions of China and the world. Pandas are special to Chengdu, but it's funny to have them as the national animal. On that note, I think I'll end it here. I'm having a lovely time in Chengdu. Thank you very, very much to all the messages. I'm sharing more and more in my newsletters, and again, you can subscribe to that at albionneverdies.com. Do check out Danny Gaster's channel, The Fuel Office, and I'll also share some links to my friend Caine, as he did a couple of videos on Chinese culture that I rarely enjoy. So if you enjoyed this, please go out and find that. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.